Story 1, Part 1. I've had many experiences with the paranormal since I was 16 years old, and I'd like to share my first memory of having an encounter with the paranormal. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my parents bought a house and we all moved to Severn, Maryland. I remember thinking our house was really cool because it was a double wide trailer that my dad and his friends had worked to convert into a home that had a wraparound deck, a wood stove with a chimney, and a renovated kitchen that had a beautiful wood L-shaped counter or bar. I thought it was so neat because it was one of a kind, and we had acres of land and woods to play in. My dad brought the land from a man named Clarence, and became friends with him. I met Clarence on several occasions, and thought he was one of the nicest people I'd ever met. He was gentle, kind, and patient. We'd visit him in what I thought was an apartment complex, but I later learned that he was actually in a kind of nursing home or hospice. I'd always looked forward to our visits, and remember being disappointed and confused when my dad said we couldn't go visit him any longer. I never really talked to my dad in depth about it, but I realized that he must have died around that time, and my dad was trying to protect my brother and I from being hurt from the loss. Between the ages of 10 and 16, I would spend a lot of time outside on the deck, reading under a tent I had set up that consisted of a few towels draped over a square portion of the deck that jutted out and looked over our garden. I always loved being outside in the shade, with the breeze blowing through the slats in the rails of the deck. My favourite snack was dill pickles and cheddar cheese, and I'd always carefully cut them into little pieces so I could alternate eating them while reading one of my favourite books. If I wasn't on the deck reading, I was out in the woods, trying to build a fort out of scrap wood that I'd find around our property. I remember being obsessed with trying to create a piece of wood that would move on the side so I'd have a secret entrance. I could see the house from where my fort was, so I always felt relatively safe when spending time outside. We had neighbours, of course, but we had enough land that they never felt like they were too close. Our property had two fairly long driveways, one that went up very close to the front yard of our house, and one that was in the back of our property, about 100 to 200 feet from my fort. The front driveway went past a few of our neighbours' houses, and right before you got to our house, past Clarence's old house. When my dad bought the property, he bought everything that was on it, including Clarence's old house. My dad kept Clarence's house, even though to me it looked like it could fall down at any moment. I was never sure if it was because he loved the man so much and didn't want to tear it down out of respect, or if it was because the house was generally okay, but looked bad from the outside, or both of those reasons. From what I could gather, my dad used the house to store some of his things that he wanted protected from the elements. There was a path that you could follow through the woods that connected the back driveway to the front driveway. If you ran the entire trail, it took about 3 minutes, and everything was a blur of green and brown. If you walked it through, you saw all kinds of interesting things. Things like the massive log that had an entire colony of termites, and that right in front of Clarence's old house there was a huge mound of red clay that you could use to make all sorts of cool art projects from. I walked that trail hundreds of times, and always found it very peaceful. The woods were usually filled with the sounds you would normally hear in nature: crickets, cicadas in the summer, toads, birds, and they always felt like they were special. One day, I was in my room, reading a book with the open window, and I heard music that sounded like an ice cream truck was driving around. I remember it immediately took me out of the book because we just didn't have ice cream trucks in our neighbourhood. I'm not sure what that neighbourhood is like now, but back then, middle of the late 1990s, our neighbourhood was considered country. There were businesses a few miles away, but it wasn't the kind of town where there were ice cream trucks driving around, and especially nowhere near my house or my neighbours' houses. I looked outside, but I didn't see any cars or trucks around. I left my room and went outside to see where it was coming from, and started to walk across the front yard and into the driveway, when I noticed that it seemed to be coming from Clarence's old house. I walked around the perimeter of the house and looked in the windows, but didn't see anything that could explain the music. I was certain it was coming from inside the house because the closer I got, the louder it got. However, since I was alone, I didn't try to go inside. When my dad got home later, I told him I heard music coming from the house. I remember specifically asking him if there were any children's toys in there, like a wind-up toy that played Pop Goes the Weasel. But he said there wasn't anything in there like that. From that point on, any time I'd be alone at home, I'd hear that music coming from the house. I started to ignore it after a while, because I was getting creeped out by it, and just preferred not to think about it since I was often at home alone in the afternoons. This happened throughout the year I was 16 years old, and when I was 17, my parents got divorced. I moved back and forth between my parents the year I was 17, grateful for the breaks I got away from the house in 7 due to the weird experiences I was having. One day, my dad and brother went to this corner store called Lucky's to get subs. I remember looking forward to eating the subs because they always had a great mixture of textures and were always fresh. If you've ever lived in a double wide or visited with someone who lived in one, you'd know that they are generally set up where the living room, kitchen, and dining room are basically one big room taking up half the space in the house, and the bedrooms, bathrooms, and laundry room take up the rest of the space. If you were standing in the front yard looking directly at the house and cut the house right down the middle, the bedrooms would be on the left side and the living area on the right side. The master bedroom was at the very end of the house, and I slept in there because my dad had had a series of hip surgeries and couldn't get in and out of the waterbed that was in the master bedroom anymore. He traded rooms with me, so I moved my 13-inch television into the master bedroom so I could watch television at night. If you sat perched on the very edge of the waterbed and you left the bedroom door open, you could turn your head to the left and look all the way down the hallway and into part of the kitchen and part of the living room. I'd often look down the hallway if I heard my dad coming in the house, so I could get into the kitchen quickly and get a head start on eating dinner. The television was on top of my dad's old dresser, so I was looking up at it while sitting at the edge of the waterbed. I was watching a boxing fight and completely engrossed in it when I heard someone whistling from the living room area. I was confused because I hadn't heard the front door open, and thought that it was weird that my dad would whistle instead of talk to me. Now my dad does whistle songs every now and then, but this wasn't a song really. It just sounded like if someone was walking around and whistling because they were happy. I muted the television and listened hard while looking down the hallway. The whistling continued, and I soon heard footsteps in the kitchen. The entire house was carpeted except for the kitchen, laundry room, and bathrooms. The kitchen had linoleum, so I thought someone must have walked in the house on the carpet, and I was only hearing footsteps because they had walked into the kitchen. I remember looking toward the closet because my dad always kept a shotgun there, and looking back quickly because the sound of the footsteps stopped. I didn't know what to do at that point, because I knew that I didn't know how to use the shotgun even if I could have gotten to it. I remember looking down the hallway and my eyes were filled with tears, but clear enough to see through. I remember not wanting to blink because I didn't want to obscure my vision for even a second. And when I finally did blink, it scared me even more. I had slowed my breathing so I could listen. It felt like I was going to hyperventilate at any second because I was so scared. The whistling continued, but I still didn't see anyone. I figured that if I was quiet enough, the person wouldn't know I was back in the bedroom, and maybe my dad would come back and the person would either leave or I could help my dad fight the person off. I didn't see anyone at any point, but continued to hear whistling and footsteps intermittently, as if the person was walking around in a circle, through the kitchen, past the dining room table, through the living room, over and over again. After a few minutes of this, I heard my dad and brother talking, and they opened the front door. The whistling and footsteps stopped, and I saw my dad in the kitchen with the subs. He saw my face and walked down the hall and asked me what was wrong. I told him I heard someone whistling and walking around the kitchen, dining room and living room, and instead of reacting with alarm, he told me that he would hear it too every now and then, and that it was just Clarence walking around. His reaction was so strange to me, but it was at that point that I realized that he probably had experiences too, but never talked about them. I never heard the whistling after that, but I do believe that it was most likely Clarence who was walking around that night. I never got the feeling that that was connected to the whistling and footsteps because it felt like something wanted me to go to the house. Since I never heard whistling or footsteps again, it made me think that maybe Clarence realized he scared me and didn't try to communicate with me after that. Part 2. The master bedroom has an attached bathroom, and if you're lying on the bed, you could look right and see right into the shower. The shower has a tub, and I always kept the shower curtain drawn. One night, I was brushing my teeth at the sink in the master bathroom, and all of a sudden, I felt terrified. I got the strong feeling that there was something to my left in the shower toilet area, but felt very certain that I wouldn't want to see what it was over there. I stared down at the sink, rinsed my toothbrush off, and then put it away, careful not to look to my left or acknowledge what was over there in any way. I got into bed, still feeling like something was over there, and tried to go to sleep. I didn't hear or see anything, and gradually the feeling of being watched went away. I fell asleep after a while, and when I woke up, I remember being surprised that it wasn't morning. I blinked, trying to figure out what could have woken me up, and felt like I was being spooned. I froze. I never ever tucked myself into my covers except at my feet because I tend to get hot at night. Feeling that there was someone or something right next to me frightened me so badly, and I got that feeling that I got when I was in the bathroom, like something bad was around. I knew it wasn't a person at that point, because it was the same feeling as before. So I slowed my breathing. I didn't want whatever it was to know I was aware of it. I just prayed that I would go back to sleep. And eventually I did. That night I had a dream about a little girl in a yellow raincoat and a hat standing at our back door. The door was open and the screen door was shut. She was standing on the steps and she said, "You'll remember me?" Then I woke up. I woke up because my dad came in and asked if I had gotten up and opened the back door. I never ever used to get up before 10 a.m. My dad has always called me Sleeping Beauty because I would sleep later than everyone else, and it sort of became a joke after a while. That morning, it was about 7 a.m. and I looked at my dad and asked him what he was talking about, and he said that he woke up and the back door was open. I got up and went down the hall and looked at the back door, but of course he had long since shut it. I think back, and I think it was easier for my dad to think that I had left the door unlocked or opened it, or something of that nature. The thing is, our back door has duct tape on it, all around the edges to keep out the cold. No one ever used that door. If I went outside, I used the front door. I don't sleepwalk, and no one in my family does, so I knew I hadn't gotten up in the night and unlocked it. I knew no one had broken in, because neither the back door or the front door was damaged in any way. I was really scared, especially considering what had happened the night before, but I didn't continue to argue with my dad. He seemed to have convinced himself that I had left it open, so I didn't know what to do. After that, I was too scared to sleep there, so I went to stay at my mum's place for a few weeks. At her boyfriend's house, I'd be at home on Friday nights watching movies, and I'd hear someone walking around in the bedroom upstairs. The bedroom was right above me, and I'd hear someone walking back and forth. I was alone, so I knew no one was up there. But her boyfriend had an alarm system, so I figured no one would be able to break in without me knowing about it. I'd go up there with my miniature Dachshund named Leo, and we'd check it out. But neither of us ever found anything. After a few weeks, I felt like it was okay to go back to my dad's house, and went back. After staying for a few days, I felt more comfortable with being there. My dad hadn't had any weird experiences, or at least never said anything to me, so I felt better about going back. After a week or so, I went to bed one night and woke up to something weird in the bathroom. I wear glasses and contacts, so when I wake up in the morning, everything is blurry. I woke up facing the bathroom, and thought at first that a person was lying in the tub, with one arm and one leg draped over the side. I sat up quickly and grabbed my glasses. The first thing I saw clearly was that there was no arm and leg. Instead, the shower curtain was drawn back and both the plastic shelves in each corner were in the tub crisscrossed. Not only that, when I went up to the tub, I saw that all the stuff on the shelves were in the centre of the tub, like they had been piled there. I couldn't understand how both shelves would have fallen at the same time, or how all the toiletries would be in a pile, all without waking me up. I mean, the tub was only 15 feet from the bed, so I would have woken up. Also, the curtain was drawn back, which wouldn't have happened regardless of the shelves falling. I left the bathroom and called my dad to come look at it, and he just said the shelves must have fallen and that he'd glue them back into place. I had no idea what to do at that point. My dad didn't believe me about the door, so I doubted that he would believe me about the tub, especially since I didn't actually see anything happen, just the aftermath. I went to stay at my mum's place again, completely creeped out by my dad's house. I figured hearing someone walking around upstairs was better than whatever was going on at my dad's place. By that time, my mum had moved out and had gotten her own apartment, so we had fun picking out furniture for her new place. I got to pick out my own furniture, and was happy that I had a room that felt safe. One day, I had taken a shower, and was in the living room sitting on the couch, brushing my hair. I heard a loud crash from the bathroom, and got up to go see if my boombox had fallen on the floor. When I took my shower, I took my boombox in the bathroom with me so I could listen to a CD. I had put the boombox on the sink counter well away from the edge. After I heard the crash, I assumed that's what had fallen. When I got to the bathroom, though, I was surprised to see the boombox was sitting there, right where I left it. I looked around, and when I saw the shower, I found out what had fallen. All of my toiletries were in the middle of the tub. I picked them all up and put them back, and then put my boombox away and left the apartment. I didn't know at that point if I should go back to my dad's house because whatever had been there obviously followed me to my mum's apartment. I figured it had taken some time to get to my mum's apartment, so I figured if I went to my dad's house, it at least would buy me some time. I was 18 years old by then, and had graduated from high school. It was also summer, so my brother was spending a lot of time with his friends, but my dad was around most of the time. One night, my dad told me that my brother wouldn't be staying there because he was staying at his friend's house. After eating dinner, I was watching television in the master bedroom, when the bedroom door opened. I figured it was my dad checking on me, because he would always check on me to see that I was safe. Sometimes I'd be awake, and I would tell him good night. Then I'd hear him go to sleep and start snoring. That night, though, I looked at the space where the door was open, and saw nothing. It was pitch black in the hallway, and normally I'd see my dad's face in the light of the television. But there was nothing. Then I heard my dad snoring, and I was terrified. I figured even if my brother had come home for some reason at 2 a.m., I would be able to see his face. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't risk looking away no matter how scared I was. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only a minute or so, the door slowly shut. It was scarier for me then because I was so worried about my dad. He was okay with keeping the bedroom door open when he slept, something I've never been able to do. I felt like if something was out there, it could get to him more easily. I listened and listened, but I didn't hear anything else. I stayed up all night to make sure my dad was okay, but couldn't make myself leave the bedroom. I remember crying for a long time, trying to figure out what I could do and where I could go that felt safe. I felt like I had no control over anything, and so alone. I think back now and I realise that me being alone and so fearful is probably what made it stronger. Eventually, I went back to my mum's apartment, and surprisingly nothing happened for a while. I'm not sure why, but it seemed to leave me alone. For a while. I had other experiences, but I knew none of them had anything to do with whatever it was at my dad's house. I thought maybe it had gone somewhere else. So, I went back to my dad's house. I was 19 by then, and I remember staying at my dad's house for a few weeks. And then the blizzard of 2003 happened. It was the biggest snowstorm I'd ever seen in my life, and I was shocked at how much was covered. My dad had been visiting my aunt a few days before the storm, and I had also gone because I didn't want to be alone in the house. Right before we left, my dad asked me to lock the front door. I was obsessive about locking doors, windows, and checking the locks 2 or 3 times by then, because of what happened. I remember checking the back door, windows, and front door locks. I locked the front door, and even checked each lock separately to make sure no one could get in. We left, and a few days later my dad wanted to go back to his house. My brother and I went back to shovel the walkway and the driveway, and my dad was driving behind us. When my brother and I got to the house, the front door was open. My dad got out of his car and yelled at me for not locking the front door properly. My brother and dad checked the house, but nothing was missing or anything, so it wasn't a burglary. I didn't even go in the house. I stayed outside and shoveled my car out, then left. I couldn't deal with it at that point. I was so scared that I went to my friend's house. I never told her what was going on, but she knew something was wrong. My dad sold the house soon after, and we lived at my grandparents' house for a few months. Then we went to Florida. After we stayed in Florida visiting relatives for a month, we came back to Maryland and stayed with my grandparents until my dad bought another house. That house is another story altogether. But I didn't have problems with doors being open there. It seemed as if going to Florida helped me get rid of it, at least for a while. After living with my dad for a while, I met a guy and moved up to Pittsburgh to live with him. I was 23 at that point, about to join the Air Force. One day, after he went to work, I heard singing coming from the living room. We lived in an apartment, the kind where your apartment is above your garage, so you had to climb a bunch of steps once you got past your front door to get into the living area. The singing sounded like a couple of little kids, so I figured my boyfriend had left the television on. Once I got into the living room, though, I saw the television was off, and the sound of singing moved from the living room to the top of the stairs, where it stopped. I got to the top of the stairs and looked down. The front door was open. I called my boyfriend and asked him if he forgot to lock the front door, and he said no, that he had even double-checked it that morning. I locked the front door, went back into the bedroom, and locked that door too. The next day I went back to my mum's house. By that point she had bought a house with her boyfriend and was living there. I didn't have anything really bad happen after I moved to her house, and a couple of months later I joined the Air Force. I went to Texas, which seemed to be too far for whatever it was to follow me. After that I went to Mississippi, then Germany, and moved around the US a few times after that, so I haven't had those types of experiences again. I've learnt to protect myself now, and don't feel like I felt back then. I don't know what it was or why it was trying to make me so scared. I tried to tell myself it's possible it wasn't paranormal, that someone had a key to our house and was watching us, but that doesn't entirely make sense, and doesn't make me feel any better. I know better anyway, judging from all the other experiences in my life. Story 2. So this is a bit of a peculiar situation I have found myself in. I have a weird on and off again relationship with whether I believe in the supernatural or not, given that I don't view it to be of any typical importance to my routine. I've literally taken to believing in ghosts, spirits, and the like as a flight of fancy. But some circumstances have arisen, and now I find my curiosity greatly aroused once more. I very recently made a friend, a very good friend, and we just click like snapping a bionicle joint into place. It feels as if we've known each other for years. That's not particularly weird, because I suppose the eventuality would be that I found somebody whom I would so treasure. She believes in ghosts and the supernatural, and somewhat recently was telling me a story that sent shivers up my spine. She shared that for as long as she could remember, she has had visions of this humanoid entity that was starkly black, except for where its face should be. In that particular location is a deep blue image that seems to be trying to emulate a face, but lacks any discernible features save for what could be eyes behind this. It almost, in her description, seems to be a papier-mâché mask. Aside from the slight darker spots where the presence of its eyes may be inferred, the not face is possessed of a certain texture. It stalks her at night is her claim. Sometimes, even during the day. During both of her pregnancies it drew closer, and even as I've been at her house overnight to help with her kids, it seems that its presence might have been magnified by mine, if only slightly. I have a theory as to why this is, and it so happens to link with my family history. There are a lot of dots I still have to connect, so bear with me. There is a heavy chance I'm just assigning meaning to something that holds none. I think I know of her stalker, due to some occurrences in my family scant generations ago. The Meadows weren't exactly the most stable bunch, and my sister, being vastly more sensitive than myself, has interacted with more people to this end. The majority of those she has interrogated to this end, that have any remotely verifiable credentials, seems to concur that some form of curse, if it could be so called, inhabits that line of blood. At least in ours it does. As far as only a generation back violence embodied us. My grandfather was not a good man, and during one of his more vicious rampages brutally assaulted my grandmother. My half-uncle stabbed him approximately 17 times, though he did manage to be saved by the doctors despite coding on the table twice consecutively from blood loss. Perhaps delirious and on the verge of death, he dreamed what he had seen. He described before his death a few years ago to me, and many years before to those around him after he left the hospital, that he had seen something black arise from the ground and lay claim to his soul. My grandfather changed his ways after that. He became a much more pleasant man. But when he was dying, fear had taken him once more. We go back now to my sister, who I have already described as being sensitive. She doesn't see ghosts or spirits as much as feel them. I suppose that in this regard, she feels their intent as a colour. She has repeatedly discerned the presence of something black, with her own claims of this going back long before either of us had ever heard this story from our grandfather. To her distress, it seemed to target my father the most, who himself is not a good man. At some point, it began targeting me as well. For a while I lived with my father, and during that time period he was fairly abusive. Physical abuse was limited but severe when it occurred. Primarily he used emotionally abusive tactics with heavy emphasis on how afraid of him we were supposed to be. As he got worse, we started to notice things in our house. It started with a dog, to be honest. We had 2 dogs at the time, a Chihuahua and a Papillon, both small dogs of unique appearance. We didn't have a third dog, but all of us started to see one. At first we thought that maybe the neighbour's dog had found a way into the backyard and was entering through the doggy door, so we locked it and would just open it periodically to let the beasts out to tend to their functions. Easily solved problem. Not only particularly so, we kept seeing it. Most commonly, my father kept seeing it. I'd seen it twice personally. Once before we locked the door, once a few weeks after. Things only began to get stranger from there. We started to see shadows moving into different rooms. We would hear strange mutterings from the upstairs to find nothing there. Unlike the dog, these things never happened alone. One particular night when my sister came to visit, activity increased immensely. The shadows were visibly active, and they started to slam doors, most aggressively, my stepbrother's door. Yet the first 2 new experiences anybody had experienced in a while occurred on the same night. I don't know in what particular order, because we didn't bring it up to each other until later. I'll start with my stepbrother's. He had a habit of staying out late. His curfew was 2 a.m. at the latest, so he was usually home before then. He had gone into the kitchen in order to get a drink. Our kitchen did not have a door, but a doorway. This doorway led directly into the sitting room, where a large, somewhat tacky Walmart-esque lighthouse painting sat atop the mantel of an unused fireplace. At night, the glass tended to act as a reflective surface. One could see behind them as they left the kitchen. As my stepbrother left, he did indeed see something behind him. I, he claimed, stood just behind him wearing a plaid shirt that I had thrown away long before, and staring. He turned around to face me. I was not present in the room. He went to my room. Lo and behold, I was asleep. That same night, at some point, something occurred that I'm still not entirely convinced wasn't sleep paralysis. I woke and found that my covers were too tight to move properly. I felt paralysed. Then my bed began to violently shake. During this period of time I did live in California. Earthquakes are not uncommon there. I was certainly frightened by this, but I was able to dismiss it at the time more easily because I did not know what had happened parallel to this, and because I had not yet seen that no earthquake had occurred. This is where the story becomes decidedly more personal. It started to use my voice. Times when I was clearly not or could not be home, my family would hear my voice. It never said anything terrible, but it always said things that I had said to them before. Never anything new. Now this is a bit weirder, if the context of this wasn't already fairly strange. 2 separate nights I was in an altercation with my father. Both were pretty violent for different reasons, but those nights my mother reported disturbing things around my sister. On those nights, neither of them could have known, and outside of coincidence or unknown phenomena, they could not be expected to have had such timing. My sister experienced brutal waking terrors. The last of these 2 events saw a drop-forged silver rosary snap in half. After these 2 occurrences, I found myself back in Kentucky, apparently because I'm a glutton for fucking punishment. My first abode was an apartment at the top of what was once a converted funeral home.
If you would have assumed that this did not alleviate the problem, then you would have assumed correctly. There were already things in the home. It was pretty active in the other apartments, but in mine not so. We kept sage, laid down salt lines, used red twine, and more things that I care not to mention. My roommate had been doing this long before I moved in because, haunted house. So she never had any major issues other than things in the downstairs, barring a few occurrences that let her know that it was time to reapply protections. We took a friend to a graveyard one day to visit a dead relative. It was pretty late, and I wasn't very eager to do this given that it was dark out. But it isn't as though graveyards are full of dead people or anything, so I figured what the hell, why not? While he paid his respects in the company of my roommates, I remained in my van. I watched headlights pass from behind me until I noticed something irregular by one of the gravestones nearest my van. At first, I had believed it to be a person, but I noticed that with each passing headlight, the oddity shifted nearer into the gravestone's shadow. It became apparent that I wasn't seeing a trick of the light in action, but something seemingly more sentient. It looked humanoid once it was close enough. Thankfully, my friends returned before it was too close to me to justify waiting for them. I tore out of the graveyard path and got home quickly. The first thing we did when we arrived was replace the salt lines, renew the sage, make sure the twine was secure, etc. That night was particularly turbulent. The black thing was in my house. My dog slept with my roommate at the time. He is far from a vicious creature. I've heard him growl angrily once. My roommate has heard him twice. The first time we both were present for. The second time woke her up. She kept her door open, and her room was very large. All the way at one end of her room sat a door that led into the hallway. She woke to Duran growling at something standing in the door. It looked like it was wearing a plaid shirt. At first she thought it was just me just looking into the room. Duran was still new to her, so she didn't quite understand the temperament he has, which is an extremely pleasant one, even towards strangers, children, a dog that gets along with literally anything that is nice to him. She had just assumed he was being protective. Alarmingly, she was right. She checked her phone. It was 3:11 a.m. She looked back at the door right as Duran flipped his shit because the thing was closer. No shirt, just black. Then it slid out of the room and headed into mine. I woke up just before she came back in because I heard my door slam. Then I never saw it again. You might be wondering why I think this entity is connected to my friends. My haunter was copying me. Why would it have a blue face? In the throes of my abuse in California, I had acquired something one Halloween that I started to wear just to feel secure. Whenever I felt afraid, I would don a blue morph suit and soothe my anxiety. When I went out, I picked out black clothing to complement the shade. A few of the searches I've tried have led me to a faceless ghost. And if it had been copying my morph suit, that would explain its face. The only things I don't know are how the chronology of the metaphysical was meant to work. I don't know if apparitions operate in the same linear timeline we do, or if time is more fluid to them, which would explain why the blue face would have been there. If it copied my morph suit poorly, then that would explain it. But the problem is that the faceless ghosts, from what I understand, are essentially empty shells. This is behaving in a more intelligent pattern. All I know is that last night my voice was saying her name, and it wasn't coming from my mouth. Now, look, odd as it may be, I am not particularly scared. My fear responses are strange after the abuse and trauma. But I am worried for my friend. Knowledge is the best counter I can have against the unknown. I would appreciate some insight here. Thank you for watching and or listening to this video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit the like button. I aim to release one 30-minute video every 2 to 3 weeks, So if you like my channel, go ahead and subscribe to keep up to date with all of my uploads. The links in the description to this video include all the people who contribute to the content. You'll also see links to my Twitter account, so go ahead and follow those to keep up to date with everything I'm working on. To all of my current subscribers, thank you again for your continued support and your wonderful comments. Thanks again for watching.